My name is Chaya Lester. I live with my husband and 3 children in Jerusalem. In my effort to make sense of the violence happening in Israel, I wanted to share teachings and some spoken word. I am struck by the fact that the Torah reading for this harrowing week of conflict contains none other than the archetypal tale of Jacob's ladder. The narrative opens with a powerful verb that demands our attention. It reads, Vayifga, Jacob arrived or encountered the place. This verb, yifga, carries with it a punch, quite literally. For much more than mere arrival or encounter, yifga connotes a sense of collision, of 2 objects striking each other. It's no mistake that the Hebrew term for attack, pigua, as in a terrorist attack, shares the very same root. And hence the poignant parallel to this week, for this has, after all, been a week of collisions. From the awful exchange of explosives to the more subtle throng of words launched at us in the media and online. This verb, yifga, colors our entire understanding of Jacob's narrative, and thus our own narratives, of our own making sense of this week, of this war, of the nature of the conflict that riddles this land. For this is a defining story of relationship with the land of Israel. First of all, the place that strikes Jacob is no less than Mount Moriah, the historic site of the binding of Isaac and the future site of the temple, the very sacred heart of Jerusalem. And what's more, the core content of God's message to Jacob is nothing less than the promise that this land is going to be given to his seed. This vision is at once a mystical glimpse of the corridor connecting heaven and earth, as well as the highly political promise of Jewish possession of the land of Israel. As such, it's really no wonder that our current day experience of, quote-unquote, the place, of here, of Israel, of Jerusalem, is one so terribly fraught with violence, with awe and intensity. Just as Jacob collided rather violently with this spot, so do we collide with this land. Just as the place was for Jacob the site of his very father's fearful binding, and also a place of holiness and prayer, so too, for so many of us, to be in Israel is to be struck, to be flooded by both prayerfulness and fear. Jacob wakes up after his astounding dream of the ladder and exclaims, God is in this place and I didn't know it. He's filled with fear, and he adds, Ma norah hamakom hazeh, how awful or how awesome is this place, the house of God, the gate of heaven. All too often, we don't know, cannot possibly comprehend that God is truly housed here. Certainly the evening news and trends of world opinion would say to the contrary. Even the uber-holy Jacob didn't get it. Even Jacob admits he didn't apprehend that God was here. That is, not until he was hit by it. Not until that pagua of Mount Moriah had thoroughly struck him into a state of knowing. And so perhaps it is with us too, that with each hit, with each pagua, we can access somehow some buried revelation of the godliness of this place. I admit that it is arguably absurd to ask or to expect that anybody could or should behold God in these horrific attacks, and yet I have to speak for myself and say that I find solace in this teaching. I find solace in the fact that it is this week that we learned about Jacob's fearsome collision with Mount Moriah. Yes, I can see myself as a victim of hateful attacks, or as a partaker in a national narrative of violence, or I can stretch for significance in the face of all of this absurdity. I can close my eyes and dream. I can close my eyes and dream God into this place. I can envision the ladder connecting all of this dross of worldliness to something so much higher. Yes, this place is awesome and sometimes awful. Yes, like Jacob, my voice cracks with fear. And yes, like Jacob, I utter an affirmation that God is here. Even with each fresh pagua, God is here. This poem is called Collision. Count me as one who has collided with this mountain, with this gravelly amalgam of prayer and fear, a place so revered for 3,000 years that I have no choice but to stop in my tracks and pay homage to the impact of Moriah. And though the truth be hidden in the conflict and her spinning dust, Yet I have glimpsed enough to know that this is none other than the house of God. And yes, she is replete with sonic booms and safe rooms where huddled children howl as sirens sound and war looms. But still, this is our sacred ground, rattled and riddled with bullets and shrapnel, with bloodlet and battle, and yet, for me, it is ironically and eternally unruffled by the prattle of our enemies. This is our very own concoction of awful and awesome, of blessing and foreboding all folded up beneath us as we sleep upon our rocky beds and dream in dust. You, God, have granted us the vision of prophets at this collision spot of pain and promise. You have opened our eyes to behold the ladder lapping skies, that we might exclaim, God was here all along, and I did not know. And so we find refuge in this sacrament of dirge and dirt, and so we pray at this monument of faith, known as the place where heaven collides with earth.